Hey there, it's BoardGameDave, and I have a lot of Everdell stuff in my collection, almost all of which was generously provided to me from the folks at Tabletop Tycoon for review. Now, sadly, I've gotten very behind on reviewing this stuff, and we're going to remedy it starting today and for the rest of the month in a special feature I'm calling September-Verdell. So, there's a lot to get through. We're going to talk about Farshore, which is a standalone Everdell-like game in the same universe. We're going to talk about two wonderful Everdell expansions. I've got Mistwood and I've got New Leaf. We'll talk about those together in a video. And I also have My Little Everdell, which is the family version of its big brother, of course, the original Everdell. So, that's what we have to look forward to this month, and today we're going to start by talking about Farshore, but I don't want to, so here's what we're going to do. Farshore, there's a lot to talk about with, so we're going to split it into two parts, which I've never done, but for this first video, I want to talk about Farshore by itself, in isolation, in a vacuum, and just talk about, how to play this game and then review it the way I always do. And then next week, we're going to take a look at Farshore versus Everdell. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of each. We're going to talk about each one's strengths and weaknesses, how they differ, how they're the same, and then whether or not you need both in your collection. So for today, let's just forget about Everdell and just talk about Farshore. Farshore is a worker placement and tableau building game, and it's the first in a series of edge of the map games which take place in the universe of Everdell. And if you've played Everdell, you'll see a lot of familiar elements in gameplay and theme and art and things like that. But again, for today, let's focus on just Farshore, which is designed by James and Clarissa Wilson with art by Jackie Davis, and it's for ages 10 and up, taking about 40 to 80 minutes to play. As usual, first I'm going to give you a very quick and condensed teach of how to play this game before we start talking about my 7-point criteria for reviewing a game and then giving you my final rating for Farshore. So let's head to the table and I'll teach you how to play. Alright, welcome to Farshore, a game in which you take on the role of an animal leader seeking to develop the most prosperous nautical city by constructing buildings in your city and enticing critters to move in as well. Throughout the course of the game, you're going to move through 4 seasons, and at the end of the 4 seasons, the player with the most points wins. Now, this is primarily what's known as a worker placement game. So on most of your turns, you'll be placing one of your little workers out onto a location on the main board. So you might go here to pick up some driftwood, or go here to get some seaweed, or here to get some sea glass, over here to get some mushrooms. You might go to a location to draw some cards, or you might go to one of these two very powerful island locations down here at the bottom of the board, but you should know that about halfway through the game, those two islands are going to sink and will be inaccessible for the rest of the game. Now, the reason you're going to be collecting these resources is so you can afford to play cards. So on your turn, instead of placing a worker out, you can play a card either from your hand or out here on the bay. They're both up for grabs. Each card has a cost here on the left, as well as points it'll give you at the end of the game on the right. So building this hideout is going to cost me a wood, a seaweed, and a sea glass. Now, there's 5 different types of cards represented by this little color and icon on the left. So let's go over those very quickly. Tan cards are going to have a one-time effect that happen immediately when you play the card, and that's it. Blue cards, on the other hand, give you an ongoing passive ability that changes the rules a little bit for your benefit. Green cards activate immediately when you play them, and also as you move into certain seasons, you'll activate those green cards again. Red cards give you your own location, so once they're in your city, on a subsequent turn, you can take your worker and place them here to activate that effect, usually a very powerful effect, and only you can go to those locations. And finally, there are purple prosperity cards, and these are usually very expensive. They give you a lot of points here, and also big points at the end of the game, based on stuff that you've been doing throughout the game. Now, anytime you play a card into your city, you're going to want to check with these windrose tiles. So these are going to change throughout the course of the game, but if the card that you play, for example, my unique construction, matches a criteria, in this case unique, you get to move your ship up 1 space around the perimeter of the board. Now, These numbers here indicate the number of points you're going to score at the end of the game, depending on how far you've moved your ship. And you'll notice this can go all the way up to 60 points over here on the far right. Now, if you happen to be able to match both of these criteria, of course, you would move 2 spaces. And as you cross over these icons here, you can claim some treasures. Now, these treasures are doubly helpful because not only are they 2 points at the end of the game for each treasure you have, you can also spend them when you buy a card as any one resource. So they're very, very strong as a wild resource and points at the end of the game. Another way you can play cards, by the way, is these anchor tokens. So you'll have 3 of these at the beginning of the game, and you can only use these 3 times, and you'll indicate that by putting these tokens out on a construction. So let's say I have a blue construction in my city. Later on in the game, I can play any blue critter, right, of a matching type into my city for free by, again, committing this anchor to that construction. But you want to save that for when there's a really nice critter that you really want that maybe is a little bit too expensive for you to purchase at that point. So let's say you're out of workers and you can't or don't want to place any more cards into your city. What are you going to do on your turn? Well, this is where you're going to pass into the next season, and you can do this independently of anybody else. So we all start the game in the winter, so naturally the first season you're going to pass into is spring. So you'll take a look at the top of the board to see what you're going to do on your passing turn. So in this case, going into spring, you're going to gain a new worker and then activate all those green cards in your city. Sometimes you're just going to take cards from the bay or from the deck, and sometimes you're going to do both. But the important thing is that you're getting new workers. At the beginning of the game, you start with only 2 workers in winter, then in spring you get 3, then in summer you get 4, and then in fall you've got 5 whopping workers to go out and collect resources, activate other locations. So you'll notice that your game escalates from season to season. You'll notice also as well, the last person that passes into the season is going to rotate out these windrows tiles. Remember, that's the primary way you're going to be moving these ships along. So that'll keep those tiles changing, so you're looking for different cards to combo with. Once all players have passed 4 times, it's the end of the game and it's time for endgame scoring. But before we talk about endgame scoring, we need to talk about these map tiles. So on your turn, you can send a worker over to the dunes to claim one of these map tiles. Now, depending on the player count, you'll have different number of maps out there, but essentially what you're going to do is grab one of these that you've accomplished in your city. For example, if I have 3 tan cards in my city, I could claim this. If I have at least one of each of those different types, I could grab this one on a subsequent turn, and maybe on a third turn I could go to the dunes and grab this one, okay? And what that's going to mean is at the end of the game, each one of these is worth 1 or 2 times the number of maps that I have, and it can't take duplicates. So in this case, this would be 1 times 3, 2 times 3, and 1 times 3 over here for 12 points. But that can be a massive source of points if you really focus on that. Hannah and I just played a game, and she got 32 points from really going for those maps. So at the end of the game, what are you going to add up? You're going to add all the points listed in the top corner or the middle of the cards. You're going to activate any of these prosperity cards and add those points there. If you've gotten any point tokens throughout the game, that's these shells. Whoops, not the mushroom. Each of these shells is 1 point each. Don't forget, each of these treasure tiles is worth 2 points if you have them at the end of the game. And you're going to look for how far you've moved your ship and add that to your score as well. Don't forget the map scoring if I didn't mention that. And then, of course, at the end of the game, whoever has the most points out of all those different things wins. Now, I also want to point out very quickly, there is a fantastic solo mode included in Farshore. If you want to play a solo game, you're going to be playing against Captain Bonnie Redclaw, and she has a variety of personalities / difficulties that you can attempt, and you're just going to alternate turns with Bonnie Redclaw. She has her own action she takes, she has her own preparation for the season effects as well, and a big deck of cards here that you'll flip and resolve from top to bottom and kind of going for certain priorities that she has. She even has her own planning card where you'll place tokens representing each of the card types to kind of give her a strategy she's working for, which is really interesting. And she'll snatch up those map tiles very, very quickly. She's a very cunning, wily opponent. In a solo game, you're also going to incorporate some of these weather cards. Now, these are random events that you'll incorporate each season. You'll uncover a new one, and they've got these really detrimental effects that affect you, but not Bonnie Redclaw. So that's kind of disarming and very unfortunate for you, but it does make Bonnie a bit of a stronger opponent because she's unaffected by those weather tiles. So she is a very easy to manage, but feeling very like a human opponent, which is great. So a fantastic solo opponent for you to try out, but you can discover that a little bit more on your own. All right, now that you've got a basic idea of how to play this game, let's go through my 7-point criteria for reviewing Farshore, starting with the art and components. And component-wise, this game is fantastic. You've got these lovely thick cards, and more than that, the components themselves are fantastic. The little resources, you got the squishy mushrooms and the seaweed and the sea glass and the little driftwood tokens. I really love how, just like in Everdell, each one feels a little bit different. There's a different texture on those resources. That is just that extra touch that makes the game so much more tactilely really fun and enjoyable. And as far as the artwork goes, so there's a new artist for Farshore, Jackie Davis, and I feel like a lot of people wouldn't even notice that there's a different artist than the original Everdell, which is done by Andrew Bosley. So there's no transition or shift in artistic tone that I can pick up. I think that, again, Jackie Davis did a great job of just picking right up where Everdell left off with the gorgeous, cute animals and critters and locations that you build in this game. So art and components, I give it a 9.5, really stunning components. Second is complexity versus audience. Now, of course, that begs the question, who is the audience for Farshore? Well, I have to imagine that there's almost nobody who's heard about Farshore that hasn't already heard about Everdell. So anybody going into this game most likely knows what they're getting into as far as the complexity of the game and the type of game that it is and all those things. Although I will say that with the slightly streamlined rule set and the slight decrease in complexity maybe from the original Everdell, this does an even better job of matching the complexity to the target audience, which maybe, is not family gamers, but more of a casual gamer than a serious strategic heavy games fan. So I think that complexity matches audience really well. It's a 10 out of 10 for me. Third is thematic integration. And I feel like Farshore, as with many worker placement games, is very thematic. You've got these little critter helpers that are going to go out to different locations and islands to collect resources, and you're going to use those resources to build constructions, and constructions entice corresponding critters to move into your town and live in that construction. It's all very thematic. Now, is every single part of it thematically explained? I don't know about those map tiles or the windrows things. I don't know about all that, but there is a lot of thematic connections between the mechanisms and the themes. So overall, I give it a 9 out of 10 for thematic integration. Next is intuitive mechanics, and I feel like a lot of what you do in Farshore just makes a lot of sense. You put out a worker in a spot to collect the corresponding resources. You spend the corresponding resources to build the corresponding cards, right? It all just makes a lot of intuitive sense to people. It's a very easy game to teach. And I feel like with Farshore, they tried to streamline or simplify some of the more fiddly bits of Everdell, give you a little bit more flexibility with those resources, with those treasure tokens. So they did do a really good job of making this intuitive, easy to teach, and easy to play. I give it a 9 out of 10 for intuitive mechanics. Fifth is replayability, and while there isn't inherently a ton of replayability necessarily baked into this game, with over 150 different cards, there is a lot to explore. Not to mention, there's a lot of viable strategies you can pursue as far as like going for those maps really hard, or going for a production engine with a lot of those green constructions and critters, which is what I always do. So there's a lot to explore. There's a lot of reasons to come back and play this game, not only because it's so beautiful and attractive and gorgeous, but as far as, exploring different gameplay elements. Now, there aren't events and there's not a lot of, setup variability necessarily. So if you're looking for that kind of replayability, it's not necessarily there. But again, a lot of reasons to come back and play this over and over for sure. It's an 8.5 out of 10 for me. Sixth is length and fun factor. And I feel like Farshore is a really great length for the kind of game that it is. So for me and Hannah, it takes us about 70 minutes to get through a game, and solo it's about 40 to 50 minutes, which seems again like a great length for a medium to somewhat heavy sort of, strategy game. And there's a really good sense of pace and progression as you move through those seasons. So, the first season, you're not going to feel like you accomplished accomplish that much. But by the time you get to the 4th season, you've got a lot more workers to get resources. You've got more chains and combos and engine building cards that are going to get you more resources and locations to visit. It becomes much more productive and satisfying by the end. And I always like that sense of progression in a board game. So length and fun factor, it's fantastic. It's fun all the way through. There's a escalating sense of tension toward the end of the game, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. I give it a 9.5 for length and fun factor. And finally, cost versus value. Now, this was a big discussion when Farshore was initially announced because the MSRP for this game is $100, which is a crazy price for a standard size box with, nice components, but just a standard worker placement game. Now, it's got beautiful art, it's got a really rich pedigree, it's got really fun gameplay, but $100 is just way too much. So if you're paying $100 for this game, I give it a 6.5 out of 10 for cost versus value. Now, thankfully, almost nobody except for Amazon for some reason is charging $100 for this game. You can find it online at many different vendors for about $75, and even Tabletop Tycoon is selling it right now for $59, almost half price. So if you're getting it around that $60 range, I give it an 8 out of 10 for cost versus value because, again, great game, fantastic components, beautiful art. This is a very, very, very solid game for $60. So overall, again, if you're getting it near that price range, I give it an 8 out of 10 for cost versus value. And there you have it. Overall, Farshore scores an average score of 9 out of 10, which is a great score. So I highly recommend Farshore. It's a game you should definitely check out. I love the Everdell universe. I love the cozy critters. I love the beautiful art. I love the anthropomorphic animals and how they're working together to build up this town. It is such a fantastic theme and story. It's great. And if you want to explore more Everdell, Farshore is a great way to do it, especially if you love this aquatic, beachy setting as well. That's a big plus. So there you go, Farshore with a 9 out of 10. Now, don't forget, like I said, next week we're going to talk about Farshore versus Everdell, the pros and cons of each, the ways that they're similar, the ways that they're different, and most importantly, perhaps, whether or not you need both of these games in your collection. So make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that video. It's one you're gonna wanna see. If you're looking for a full solo playthrough of Farshore that I did some time ago, you can check that video out right here. If you're looking for more new family weight or lighter games, you can check out this video right here. Don't forget to leave a comment. You know that I respond to every comment down there. And in the meantime, have a wonderful week, take care, and happy gaming. See you later.